Welcome to Love for the Truth Radio, a program devoted to encouraging you to be a contender of the faith in an ever-changing church culture. On Love for the Truth Radio, we will discuss current issues and challenging views along with biblical truth that can affect our Christian worldview and how we live out our faith. And now, here's your host, Cindy Hartline.
Welcome to the program. I know you will be on the edge of your seat today because we will be talking about a topic that is not a familiar term used in public, nor talked about in church circles or even mentioned in mainstream media. The topic today is on technocracy. And our guest is Patrick Wood, who is the leading global expert on technocracy. He is the editor of the August Forecast and the August Review. The August Forecast provides info by analyzing trends that relates to markets, economics, politics, and finance. And the August Review is an historical review of global elitism, its players, and policies. Patrick co-authored 2 book volumes called Trilaterals Over Washington with Professor Anthony Sutton. The books became a bestseller and in 2 years sold over 75,000 copies internationally. Trilaterals Over Washington also became a frequent use textbook in political science classes at many colleges and U.S. universities. Welcome, Patrick Wood, to Love for the Truth Radio. It is an honor to have you with us today to introduce your new book, Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. It's an honor to have you.
Well, thank you, Cindy. We're going to have a great time during this interview, I'm sure, and I really appreciate you taking the time to go through the material and to contact me and have me on your program.
Oh, well, let me just tell you this. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a topic that I knew nothing about. And so it was like being in school again for me. But it is a very serious topic and one that all of us need to know more about. And so, Patrick, I actually did my homework. I looked up technocracy in Webster's dictionary, and this is what it read. Very simply, but very clear. The government or control of society or industry by an elite of technical experts. Now, when I read that, I thought, wow, this is a profound topic. And, if your book is true, which I believe it is, then life as we know it now will change in the near future. And that's why I chose to have you on the program. There will no longer be a social system based on the principle of individual rights, political freedom, rule of law, or economically a free market. We will be governed by another system, technocracy. So, Patrick, let's start with the first part of your book titled Technocracy Rising. We need to know what technocracy is before we begin. And so can you explain it in a little more detail for the audience?
I can. And your definition of technocracy with a small t out of the dictionary is absolutely correct. It does mean, in one sense, a government, the control of society by an elite of technical experts or engineering scientific experts. But there's a deeper meaning to it as well. Back in the 1930s, very few people really have researched this, but back in the 1930s, there was a huge movement in America called technocracy. And there was an organization was founded called Technocracy Incorporated in 1934. They had hundreds of thousands of members around the country, card-carrying members who paid money for it. And this was when capitalism was perceived to be dying, if not dead. And people were looking for a replacement economic system. And when technocracy was proposed by some of the top engineers and scientists of that day, Americans thought, wow, these guys, they got to know what they're doing. We better listen to them. And what they were saying is that people should let them, the engineers and scientists, run society and throw the politicians out, essentially.
Wow.
One technocrat actually called on Roosevelt during his election campaign to declare himself dictator as soon as he got elected so that he could impose technocracy on America and basically abolish Congress and just turn everything over to the scientists and engineers who wanted to run the nation according to their utopian dream of perfect, efficiency and everything working in harmony with each other, according to them, of course, not to us. But it was a scary, scary thing. And technocracy was rejected by the American people before the 1930s were over, fortunately. One reason that was rejected is because people saw a very tight relationship between technocracy in America and Nazis and National Socialism in Germany, which was rising at the time as well. So they rejected technocracy here, but it lived on. Philosophically, it lived on, specifically in the halls of Columbia University, of all places. And it reemerged again, in my opinion. It reemerged between 1968 and 1970. And what we have today, what we see around the world, is very much an expression of 1930-style technocracy. And I'll tell you what, the reason I got onto this, I got so excited about it when I first figured this out, was that this is a historical event that people have just completely missed. Historians have missed it, too. There's a reason for that. I might explain it later. But history books just don't hardly record anything about this time in our history.
And that was going to be my first question, because I thought, wow, in the 1930s, if it was that big. I think the big surprise is that technology wasn't so big back then. So just to think that technology can take over on that magnitude and govern a people, and to throw out democracy, what we have, it actually surprises me. So that's probably why they voted against it, which gives us hope.
That was part of it. I'm sure there were some intellectuals that were looking at it and analyzing their doctrines and stuff, and kind of thought in the end that this will never work. The utopian dreams never play out the way you think. Right. And I'm sure there was those types, but I think the average guy on the street probably got a little bit more excited when he saw the technocracy uniforms that everybody was wearing, the little gray suits with the three-piece suits and the little lapel pins and the saluting and all that kind of stuff. They didn't have a Nazi-style salute, but the whole picture was close enough to National Socialism in Germany, which was very much in the news in those days, by the way, in America. Right. That was enough to scare a lot of Americans. Say, I don't know what this is, but I don't like the way it looks on the surface of it, and we don't go along with anything that has to do with Nazi Germany.
And I could see where that could scare them, because our nation at that time was at a very low because of the war. And so to see something like that begin to rise up, I didn't know anything about those little suits, so you just opened my eyes to that.
Yep. It's interesting that in Canada, for about, a period of a few years anyway, that technocracy was outlawed for that very reason.
Well, look at that.
They didn't do that in America, but they did in Canada.
So if you just tuned in, why should Christians know about technocracy? Because it's the Trojan horse that will set the stage for the new world order, which we as believers know that is the perfect scenario for the Antichrist as prophesied in the Bible. So please stay tuned and really listen to what we're talking about here. This is where we're headed, folks. So don't touch that dial. Don't say, I don't want to hear this about technocracy. You need to know this, because technocracy is on the rise. And global expert and author Patrick Wood has written a book on it, Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Transformation. Now, Patrick, I was looking down your chapters. I don't have your book because it's not, out of press yet. But in chapter 1, you write about the historic record of early technocracy. And can you explain some of the earlier roots, even before what we just talked about?
Well, I can, and it's interesting. The more you look back into history, into the 1700s and 1800s, and follow the train of thought that was produced by philosophers of the day, you can see exactly why technocracy came alive finally in the 1900s. And it didn't just start in the 1932, 1933. It had a running start probably starting in earnest back around 1920 and running through the 20s. Of course, during the Roaring 20s, whatever engineers and scientists were doing was of no interest to the public whatsoever. They were partying, they were drinking, they were dancing, and whatever, So there wasn't much news about technocracy during the 20s. But when the Depression hit, all of a sudden, the scientific world, just like a lightning bolt, they all stood up together and they said, somebody has to give an answer to society for doing something better than what capitalism has done. And you can picture also back in those days that you were right on the heels of the Bolshevik Revolution. You were right on the heels of the socialist movement in Europe in general, and of course the rise of Nazi Germany. There was lots of philosophical movements in America going on. We had the Communist Party USA that was very active at that time. You had the whole progressive movement that was, that was proposing radical new, societal ideas for rearranging the structure of our society. And there was philosophers from the previous 200 years that really had just kind of made all this come together at that same time. One of the most predominant influencers was a philosopher by the name of Henri Saint-Simon, who lived. He died in 1825, and then you had Auguste Comte also, who died in 1857. He was the father of sociology in general and the founder of the philosophical principles of positivism. And they were two of the primary ones from the early days. Then you had Thorsten Veblen, who died in 1929. He was very key in the ideas of early technocracy as well.
We're going to wrap this segment up on positivism, and we're going to be talking about the philosophies that gave rise to technocracy, so please stay tuned.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
If you're a first-time listener, you'll find that on Love for the Truth Radio, we discuss news and views through a biblical worldview. We believe that the Bible is the inherent Word of God and the absolute truth that should be applied to every aspect of life. We don't proclaim to have a cap on the truth, but we do have a love for biblical truth. So please take everything you hear on this radio show to study and prayer. And thank you for listening to Love for the Truth Radio.
The nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. This is, seems to me, the ultimate in malevolent revolution, shall we say. And this is a problem which has interested me for many years, and about which I wrote 30 years ago a fable, The Brave New World, which is essentially the account of a society making use of all the devices at that time available, and some of the devices which I imagined to be possible, making use of them in order to, first of all, to standardize the population, to iron out inconvenient human differences, to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system. And since then I have continued to be extremely interested in this problem, and I have noticed with increasing dismay that a number of the predictions which were purely fantastic when I made them 30 years ago have come true or seem in process of coming true, that a number of techniques about which I talked seem to be here already, and that there seems to be a general movement in the direction of this kind of ultimate revolution, this method of control by which people can be made to enjoy a state of affairs which, by any decent standard, they ought not to enjoy.
If you just tuned in, we are talking about technocracy. You just heard a soundbite of Aldous Huxley when he gave a speech at UC Berkeley on the Ultimate Revolution in 1962. Aldous Huxley introduced technocracy to the public through his novel, Brave New World, in the 1930s. And technocracy has been around for a long time. And with us is global expert on the subject, Patrick Wood. Patrick is also the author of Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Transformation. Now, in our last segment, we discussed the in-depth meaning of technocracy, some of the historic record, and we're going to touch on the philosophies behind it, because we did not get done with that in the last segment. And then we'll move on to technocracy transforming the globe. But let's start up, Patrick, with the philosophies that have given rise to technocracy. I think we left off with positivism.
Well, there were several philosophies that contributed to technocracy. It was kind of a cauldron more than a specific philosophy. But positivism was one of them. And that's a technical term that a lot of people are not going to understand. But it was a philosophy that was generated by a Frenchman by the name of Auguste Comte. And he is known as the father of modern sociology, by the way. The philosophy was very popular in the late 1800s, and he was really considered to be the first philosopher of science. And he elevated science in general by claiming it to be the only authentic knowledge in the world is derived as a result of scientific knowledge. And so he proposed a science of society, if you will, where sociology, as he viewed it, and science would merge to apply scientific principles to society in general. It's a kind of a dangerous philosophy in a way, isn't it? But you had kind of as a result of all these things, though, a philosophy kind of pop out that I call scientism, and scientism really takes positivism to an extreme by claiming that science alone can produce truth about the world and reality. And of course, this flies in the face of the Bible that claims that it has the source of truth on the world and reality. And scientism is just the opposite. It rejects all other forms of truth except that which can be discovered through science.
Right.
And so this really is what fueled the early technocrats. They felt that the society was changing because technology had come in and changed the fabric, if you will, dyed the fabric of society. And therefore, because of that, society could only be managed by people with scientific knowledge. And that's where technocracy is born. Right at it was a nexus of science and sociology. And when those two met and got together, a pact with the devil was born. That's all I can say. And it's been kind of downhill ever since. And even though these people kind of drifted out of power for a while and out of the limelight, they are back in the limelight today. Well, I'm going to put them back in the limelight. They're back in the limelight today. If you know what to look for, they're easily identifiable.
Right.
That's why we're talking about
That's why we're talking about it. And I do want to move on to the second part of your book. The title is The Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. What do you mean by global transformation, Pat?
Well, we literally have a global transformation going on right now. And I'll give you some of the things that are tied to technocracy that people will probably have some idea. You have the topic of sustainable development, for instance, which basically says, that's an economic term, by the way. It basically says that the world needs to be in balance with the resources that the earth has to produce. In other words, we can't consume any more than the earth can produce, and so on and so on. And they decide what the earth can produce. This is a scientific idea that, even though it wasn't called sustainable development in the 30s, this was exactly what they wanted to do with technocracy. You have the topics of Agenda 21, for instance, that came out of the United Nations that seeks to impose the United Nations agenda of sustainable development on the whole world, not just America, the entire planet. And then you have, other telltale signs as well. For instance, topics like smart grid, where houses are being fitted with digital meters that can read data from the appliances in your house and transmit that back to the utility or to the higher authority, wherever the data would go. And smart grid is not just an American phenomenon. Every industrialized nation in the world is implementing smart grid at the same time, and there is a huge movement underway as we speak to create a global smart grid where all of the energy consumed in the world and allocated will be rolled up into one singular policy center. Don't know where that's going to be yet. Could be somewhere in Europe. Who knows? But they're creating a global smart grid to control the ebb and flow of energy, the consumption of energy throughout the world. And this also was part and parcel of early technocracy. They wrote about this in great detail back in those days. So the world is undergoing this transformation where everything is being put under surveillance, everything is being put under control. The scientists and the engineers are the ones who stand up and say, how dare you dispute global warming? It's settled science. Well, no matter that there's been 30,000 scientists around the world, many of them climate scientists, who have signed a statement stating the exact opposite of what these pseudoscientists who are involved in this technocratic movement, refuting them, but that doesn't matter to them. They continue to say, oh, you climate deniers, you need to be, whatever, I don't know, say sent to prison, but, they just insist that their science is right, and because they say it's right, we should do whatever they say. You see, this is the philosophy of technocracy, that we should do what they say simply because they're the scientists and the engineers, and they know better, and you and I are stupid.
Mm-hmm. So there's a big transformation going on in economics and government and religion, and we're going to move on to that. But real quickly, I'd like you to just talk about the Trilateral Commission, because you believe they are the ones that's responsible for this transformation.
I think the evidence of that is overwhelming at this point. And I'll tell you, I would never have had a setting into which to put technocracy had I not studied the Trilateral Commission for almost 40 years. I've written about it, studied it extensively over the years, and they are the people who hijacked our executive branch in 1976 with the election of Jimmy Carter. And I see their fingerprints, and my book brings this out in great detail. Their fingerprints on all of this stuff is all over this. And the very first thing they wrote in 1973, when founded, by the way, by Zbigniew Brzezinski and David Rockefeller in 1973, they proposed a new international economic order. That was a buzzword. That was their phrase back then, their catchphrase, new international economic order. Sutton and myself did not really understand, I know at that time, what they meant. We figured, well, they're just going to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic or something to favor them, of course. So we just kind of went on that assumption. When I discovered technocracy, I thought back to that new international economic system. And the reason it caught my attention is that technocracy was a replacement economic system for capitalism. That's specifically what they said in the 1930s. It was to completely replace capitalism with an energy-based economy rather than a price-based economy. I don't know if that makes sense, but in price-based economy, we have money, we have supply and demand. If people want something, you make more, prices go down, everybody gets satisfied, whatever. This is the price-based economy we understand. An energy-based economy that they proposed in technocracy would measure economic life according to the energy that's consumed in the process. This is totally different. In fact, I've been studying this for years, and I have an economic background. I've been studying this for a long time now, and I still have a hard time getting my head around what this would mean for society. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here doing the same thing. I'm trying to wrap and I've been reading about this in the last couple of days. But I mean, what we're seeing here then, that it's not only a transformation of economics, now we're talking about a transforming of government here.
It has to be. It's not that they set out to capture government for the sake of political power. The only reason they needed government was to implement their economic policies. And that's exactly what's happened. They haven't used government to impose outright dictatorship, like Mussolini or whatever, but they have used the government to create all of these trade treaties and stuff along the way, and all of the policies, things like what the EPA has done with, environmental regulations, and other agencies have done to implement, programs, education programs like Common Core, for instance. All of these things tie back to the same hydra-headed monster that we find at the United Nations, okay, where all of these things have been shoved into to get contagion around the world. All of these things are global. They're not just America. Agenda 21 is a global imposition of sustainable development policies to transform the world into an energy-based society and world. They need a political system of governance to achieve that. There will come a day when governance is not really necessary anymore, and my guess is it will be done away with completely. We see a foreshadow of this in the European Union right now, for instance, where there are still local governments, but they have no power. They have no say in the European Union when they go to council meetings. Each one of them only gets like 2 minutes a year to say his piece, and that's it. So they have no power over achieving anything. They're there in title only.
Yeah, and we have about a minute to wrap up this segment, but basically, Patrick, we were talking about the transformation of economics and how that's going to create a transforming of government, and everyone has heard of the green economy, Agenda 21. If you look beyond that, we're seeing our government reforming right before our eyes. We'll be back in just a second, but we'll be going on a break, and we'll be talking about the trilaterals and how they are reinventing government.
Many would agree that we are living in unprecedented times. Grave immorality is on the rise, as in the days of Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah. There are wars and rumors of wars as nations rise against nations. Prophecy is being fulfilled as the birth pangs become quicker and harder. These are the signs of the return of Jesus Christ. There is one sign often left untaught. Jesus also told the disciples in the Olivet Discourse to take heed that no man deceive you. This warning applies to us too. Deception has infiltrated the churches through many false teachings and movements, making apostasy paramount. As contenders of the faith, we do our best to research and discuss these false teachings for you, the listener. Thank you for having a love for the truth.
That's the next step of consumer electronics, is getting these devices to communicate with each other and share the information that they already have. The information was known. My calendar had it. Again, these other apps had it, but they weren't sharing that information. And that will be the next step in consumer electronics. Just some of those examples of where that information, where those bits start to become meaningful. You've got a small device by a company called ThinkEco, a modlet that you can plug into any outlet, and then it records and captures all the energy use of whatever you plug into it, a toaster, a microwave oven, a coffee pot. Capturing that data over time, every day, every week, and then allowing you to make informed decisions. So for example, you might recognize I'm only using that toaster in the mornings from 7 to 8. Why don't I flip the power off for that outlet? And then you can conserve energy, you can start to manage your home, and you can make those decisions from a program standpoint as opposed to having to manually do it. what looks like a regular pill top bottle from AT&T is actually a connected pill top bottle. So it records every time you open that pill top, pill bottle. And most importantly, it also records when you don't open it. Because it's connected, it then sends you a text message to say, why haven't you opened your pills? It can also send your neighbor a text message. It can send families or doctors a text message. You can imagine that doctors could then download all of this information and look across time to see when you were taking your medicine and, more importantly, when you weren't. And so these devices will start to talk to other devices and allow us to make more informed decisions. Capturing data that's already there, all of this information exists.
If you just tuned in, we are talking about technocracy. The soundbite on the break was that of Sean Dubakwa speaking at the TEDx in 2011 on reinventing consumer technology. Now, if you heard our show on transformational festivals with Carl Tygrib, we talked about how festivals like TEDx are transforming our culture. And this is one example. No surprises that the implementation of technocracy is being talked about at TEDx. Well, with us today is global expert on the subject, Patrick Wood. Patrick is also the author of Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Transformation. Now, in the last segment, we were talking about the transforming of economics, government. We did not get a chance to move on to religion. We're going to save that to the last segment, segment 4. But I would like to talk about, Patrick, which we did not get a chance to talk about in the last segment, is that in the 1990s, the trilaterals were behind Bill Clinton and Al Gore in the Reinventing Government initiative. Can you explain how our government is being reinvented? I mean, you did explain some of that. You did touch on some of that, but I'd like to go in just a little bit more detail before we move on.
Well, I certainly can. It slipped under the radar, I'll tell you that much. People knew there's something wrong with it. If they figured if Bill Clinton and Al Gore did it, there must be something wrong with it. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be facetious. But it really slipped under the radar. And let me give you a little quote from the original Technocracy, the Technocracy study course that was written by M. King Hubbard back in 1934. And I'll preface this by saying that what they proposed was reorganizing government, or governance, if you will, into what they call functional sequences. And a functional sequence was a core slice of society that would stand alone and be operated by these scientists and engineers for the good of all society. Okay, they call it a functional sequence. So let me just read it to you. It's very short. The basic unit, quote, the basic unit of this organization is the functional sequence. A functional sequence is one of the larger industrial or social units, the various parts of which are related to one another in a direct functional sequence. Thus, these are engineering terms, by the way. Yeah. Thus, among the major industrial sequences, we have transportation, agriculture, textiles, iron, steel, telegraph, television, highways, pipelines, waterways, railroads. I'll go on now. Among the service sequences, which were like functional sequences, but they were service-oriented, are education, public health, medicine, dentistry, public hygiene, and all hospitals and pharmaceutical plants, as well as institutions for defectives. That's a direct quote. I don't want to get hung up on the business about institutions for defectives, but that had to do with eugenics. That is the cleansing of the gene pool. That's a very scary statement. But you see, what Clinton did in the 1990s was set up these functional sequences. He laid the groundwork for these functional sequences to take over the American society, the whole societal machine. So we have seen things come in, like Obamacare, for instance. That's a functional sequence that was specified in the 1930s, that all public health would be consolidated and run by government, and they quoted medicine, dentistry, public hygiene, all hospitals, and all pharmaceuticals. Okay, here we see it today. We see it in agriculture, where agriculture has been completely transformed in America. We've lost tens of thousands of farmers in the last 15 to 20 years. It's just incredible. Industry's being decimated. We see things such in the transportation area. We see airlines and railroads. You know, people wonder how on earth can Amtrak stay in business? They've never made money ever in 1 year, in any year that they've ever existed. And yet the government still keeps this functional sequence alive.
Wow. Yeah.
So this is how the government has been reformed, starting with Bill Clinton with his initiative. He signed an executive order that created kind of a small agency, if you will, to reinvent government in America. This is exactly what they've done. We see the fruits of it all around us today.
And what's so interesting, too, is we're seeing the fruits, but I think it was hard to really connect the dots. I think right now I'm just starting to connect the dots in my mind, and I've been reading this stuff for the last week and a half, you know. But, you know, I guess people are wondering, okay, well, what does that have to do with me personally or our family, you know? In your book, Patrick, you break down how our household energy is transformed through a smart grid, and we're going to see how this really plays off with what Patrick just talked about. But what does technocracy as a whole have to do with the creation of this little smart grid that almost every household will have if they don't have it already? You know, how does this tie in with the consumed energy, you know, as a community, a household, or even as an individual? I think the audience will better understand then how government is really, I know we understand that we're in control now with, you know, Obamacare, and we can understand that, but it's hard to connect the dots. I think it'd be easier to determine technocracy as this energy source if we can explain more about the smart grid.
Let's remembering first that technocracy is basically an economic system meant to replace capitalism. Let me read to you the first 5 requirements that they determined in 1934 that were necessary for technocracy to take place. Number 1, this is direct quote, register on a continuous 24-hour per day basis the total net conversion of energy. Number 2, by means of the registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load. Number 3, provide a continuous inventory for all production and consumption. Number 4, provide a specific registration of the type, kind, etc. of all goods and services where produced and where used. And number 5, hold on to your seatbelt, provide specific registration of the consumption of each individual plus a record and description of the individual.
That just blows my mind right there. I'm sorry, but you know, that's where you kind of draw the line. Because now we're not just talking about the energy that's being used in a household. We're talking about the energy that's being used per individual. And then on top of it, a description of the individual themselves. So what are we saying here, Patrick?
We're saying, you know, if you think about this in terms of a factory, it's a little bit easier. If you ran a factory, if you owned a factory, lots of machines, people running here and there, and, you know, putting supplies together, making things, and shipping out the back door. You want to run the factory as efficiently as possible. You have to measure, you have to monitor, you know, processes going on. People have to have time clocks, and you do work and motion studies to figure out how things can be done faster so you can maximize your profits. And for the sake of a factory, I would say, fine. If I owned a factory, I would do those things too. But society is not a factory, and yet the engineers and scientists are viewing society no differently than a factory floor, where they conclude that they must monitor and measure every little detail. This is what they wrote about, what I just quoted you. They must monitor every stinking detail in the system. They know more about you than you know about you. And the purpose is for control. This is the sociology aspect. They want to control the shop floor, if you will, and the whole nation or the whole world is the shop floor. So they have to know what you buy and sell. Think about all the reward cards that you have in your wallet, probably on your keyring.
Yeah.
You know, you go to a store, you give them your reward. all of that data gets sold back into the system. You realize that everybody at the top in economic now knows exactly what you buy and sell. Mm-hmm. They know where you go. They're recording your phone calls. They know your mind, your psychographics, because they're recording your emails, your phone calls, all of your communication. And in a very real sense, they know more about you than you do.
That is really scary. I'm sorry. When it first came out with these reward coupons or whatever, where you're getting back the coupons of the things that you already purchased, you look at that and say, wow, they really know what I buy. Isn't that interesting? And so I get back the coupons for that. It is mind-blowing. It's very mind-blowing. And if you listen to On the Book Break, we heard a soundbite of Sean Dubakwa explaining how the caps on medicine bottles are chipped now, determining how many times the lid is taken off and how many times it's being put back on. And if you forget to take it off, you get an email that says that they send you an email saying you forgot to take your medicine. Now at first glance, it may seem accommodating. You may say like, wow, that's pretty good. If I forget, I get an email. However, do we really want this big brother kind of telling us when to take our medicines? Now, you're absolutely right. On one hand, it seems convenient, and on another hand, it sounds too much control for me. And on top of it is they're determining not only to help us out, to help manage our lives. Now we're being, as an individual, accounted for our, quote, behavior. We'll talk about later, what that means. But what I see here is that to manage and consume energy on this kind of level, it's going to take massive surveillance and data collection by the government, isn't it?
It does, and that's the whole point of it. The whole business of spying on people that mm-hmm. we've heard in the news recently, like with all the Snowden revelations and stuff that were made from, about what the NSA is doing. All of this surveillance is not about, the Gestapo, and it's not about, just political hammering. It's about economic issues. They want to have all this information available to them so that they can control the economy for their maximum benefit. And they look at you and I just like so many cattle in the feedlot. We're just out there, and they're going to put some food in our little trough, and we're going to dutifully march over, every morning and evening and stick our face in the trough, and and they're going to measure everything that comes out of us so that they know how well we're digesting it, and they're going to,
Okay, hold that thought, Pat. We'll be coming right back on that.
I know. Just say moo.
We are an energy source. That's what they see us as. We'll be talking about that. We'll be right back.
And Rick Warren, Bill Hybels, Robert Schuller, Brian McLaren. Rick Warren, the leader of the purpose-driven movement that's just encroached itself in so many churches. One of the biggest selling books of all time. Signed that. Robert Schuller, the leader of the positive possibility thinking movement. Bill Hybels, the leader of the seeker-sensitive movement, one of the main leaders. Brian McLaren, the Pied Piper of the emerging church movement, who's led so many young people astray. All these guys and many others signed this document of trying to find. And guess what? They want to come to agreement so they can bring world peace. Yet the Bible says, again, Jesus said things would get worse because people won't worship the true God, and they'll persecute those who do worship the true God. And the Bible does say that there'll be this three-pronged new world order of world religion, world commerce, and world government. Oh, by the way, Rick Warren is involved in bringing forth a new world order. He's admitted he's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, which is all about diminishing American sovereignty and bringing a new world order. And by the way, guess what? He said it's going to have 3 phases. He said just like a stool that needs 3 legs, the new world order must have a religion, business, be based on business, and of course, government. And that's what the Bible says about the end time Antichrist religion.
If you just tuned in, we are talking about technocracy. You know, on the break, we heard a soundbite of Joe Shamel, founder of Good Fight Ministries, talking about Rick Warren's ecumenical idolatry and antichrist religion. And you will see how all of this ties in with the transformation of Christianity. In our last segment, we went over the transforming of economics, government, and now we'll be touching on religion. You can see how technocracy actually is a web, and it has its tenets in every area of our lives. And the main intent is so that we will be controlled by technology or technicians. Patrick, you know, I would like to shed some light on the connection between Peter Drucker, the three-legged stool philosophy of communitarianism, and the postmodern church growth. You know, did I cut you off on the last time? I told you to hold that thought. Maybe we better continue your thought, and then we'll get on to the question I just asked. I'm sorry about that.
I think I lost that thought, but let's move on.
Okay, you want to move on? Okay, let's move on. All right, there's so much to talk about, and I think we're going to need another show on this, and I've been really trying hard to get all this in one show, just to give the audience an overall view of what technocracy really is and how, in fact, it is changing our lives and almost our very existence. But anyway, I want to shed some light on the connection between Peter Drucker, you know, the beloved three-legged stool philosophy of communitarianism, and the postmodern church growth movement. How does that tie in?
Well, exactly. Peter Drucker was a famous management consultant, probably the most famous management consultant from the last century. I think he died in 2005, but he wrote prolifically. He was the go-to consultant for all of the Fortune 5,000 companies around the world, and the guy was a genius. No question about it. As far as business stuff is concerned, he really was a genius. The problem is he was not a Christian at all. He admitted to not being a born-again Christian. And he held to a particular philosophy that he was an evangelist for called communitarianism. And I'm not going to give you a lecture on exactly what communitarianism is, other than you'll get it along the way. What he talked about as three-legged stool concept was that he believed society was resting on three different pillars, and one of them was the political system, one of them was the government or the economic system, and the other one was the societal system, the belief structure, if you will. And this was not unique, by the way. I wrote about this kind of thing back in 1975, I think. It was pretty obvious to anybody who looked at it that those are the three core elements, if you will, the main elements of society. You can't take away any one of them without collapsing society. If you take away the economy, everything else falls apart. You take away the ethical base, everything falls apart. Take away all three, like what we have today, man, you really fall apart.
Yeah.
That's one reason we're struggling so much, I think, is because all three of those stool legs are being eaten away by termites. But anyway, back to Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker proposed, especially in the last part of his life, that the societal part of it, the social part of society, was not being bolstered enough. In other words, it wasn't moving along fast enough to keep up with the economic transformation and the political transformation that was going on. So he proposed to use the church, and specifically the megachurch, to supply that last leg, or to shore up that last leg, and tilt it towards this globalist, technocracy system that was growing up all around it, right? And the idea that he had early on was to pair up with a guy from Texas, a businessman who made a lot of money in cable television and media, and he was a multimillionaire, and he's also a Christian, he claimed. I'm probably is, but he was a Christian, and he had this organization he'd founded called Leadership Network that was reaching out to churches around the country. And Drucker saw an opportunity to pair up with Buford to create a consulting organization that would go out to churches essentially and preach communitarianism to them. And the idea of communitarianism is to build up the local community to be in sync. In other words, to synchronize it, if you will, with globalist ideals and principles that were already being put into the world model, into the political system, into the economic system. And so communitarianism was designed to reach out to local communities, whether they be small towns or cities or large neighborhoods or whatever, and for that organization to take over the quote-unquote faith-based activities in that community. And in one very real sense, they were the idea was to create a community that was led by a community organizer. Now, a community organizer ought to be a buzzword because our president, President Obama, his only real claim to fame work-wise was he was a community organizer in Chicago for several years.
Right.
And I don't think his work turned out particularly well, but a community organizer is one who orchestrates the community for some particular goal. And so Buford and Drucker together created this doctrine that went out to the megachurches around the world, around our nation especially, and basically co-opted them into the globalist system, and they didn't really have a clue what had happened. They don't have a clue what's happened even to this day. But the two earliest disciples of Peter Drucker, they were personally involved with Drucker, or Drucker was personally involved with them, was Rick Warren, number one, of Saddleback Church from Southern California, who authored the peace program that's in play around the world now, and also Bill Hybels, who is a leader in the emergent church movement. And but just beyond those two, virtually every larger church in America has been approached and influenced by these people in some way, shape, or form. The effect of it has been to refocus the church's view of heaven and focus it down on earth, onto the community. And so instead of being concerned with heavenly and eternal things, the church is now concerned with earthly, earthly things, communities, and so on. Helping the poor, and those aren't bad things to do. Don't get me wrong, but there's no mandate in Scripture that says that the church has any responsibility to build a kingdom of God on earth. It's just not there.
Yeah, and let's back up just a little bit and focus on some of the key words that you were saying. Building up a community, faith-based community. I can remember listening to Bill Hybels back in the day when I used to go to his leadership summit meetings. And part of building the church, or the mega church, I guess it was part of the church growth movement, was going out to your community, knocking on their door and saying, what do you think church should look like to you? And, when you got their idea what they would want, whether it be, okay, we like to have a gymnasium, a place for our kids to go, whatever the need was of the community is what that church was supposed to build. So here, at the time we were looking at it saying, okay, this is great. Church is reaching out to the community, but see, what's really happened was the community came into the church is what really happened. This is where you're seeing community organizers. Let's see what the community wants. And whatever they want, we'll give them what they need. And what we basically saw was a lot of unchurched people, people that did not know the Lord coming into the church. I mean, that's what I'm seeing here. Is that correct, Patrick? Yeah. And I actually, back in the day, I was part of the leadership network, never thinking that this is what they were building at the time. I think when I finally got a hold of what was going on, I stopped going to Bill Hybels' meetings. But you are absolutely 100%. About 7 years ago, the last time I looked, of how many pastors really went to the Bill Hybels Leadership Summit meeting, which happens every week, was like, back then it was 80,000 pastors that attended those meetings. And I'm sure the number is greater today. Getting the idea then as how to be a community organizers. So this is what we're looking at right now. With that in mind, we're thinking that with that in mind, how is it transforming Christianity, to fit into technocracy? I think that's the missing link there that I'm trying to wrap my brain around.
Well, it is, and the community is the building block for technocracy, and they want to have strong social support for the community that will not be too Christian to get a whole lot of biblical stuff messed up with it. And that would be something that would be that would move against technocracy in general. But the more the church keeps its eyes off of heaven, the less effective it's going to be to do anything good on earth. And they know this. I mean, they understand that that the only last thing that stands between getting total control of anything are the Christian element of society. And that still actually stubbornly holds to what the Bible says. And so these people, have been co-opted. They've been taken offline, if you will, by being put into a social system that focuses only on the community and not on heaven, and not on the Bible.
Right, and when you look at the church growth movement, we just did a show on that last week. There's a watering down of the Word of God for the sake of the church growth movement, because you have to be seeker friendly to bring people in. You have to be more relevant to what they want. You have to be more tolerant, and that makes the gospel more palatable. Easier to swallow.
I have to interject. The main thing is that it's not biblical at all. It's not Christian. It's not biblical. It's oriented, rooted in communitarianism, which is a godless philosophy of humanism to run society according to unbiblical, unspiritual values. And that's just that simple. And even though the leadership network people have been backpedaling on the importance of Drucker in Buford's organization, but in a 1998 book written by Jack Beatty called The World According to Peter Drucker, he quoted Buford as saying, quote, "I'm the legs for his brain."
Wow.
So Buford didn't bring anything Christian into the church.
Right.
He brought Peter Drucker into the church.
Yeah, we're going to wrap this up in just real quickly, but basically what we're talking about here is transforming Christianity for the purpose of technocracy. It has come into the church. It's brought much deception in, and we'll be right back as how to get in touch with Patrick Wood and more about his book when we return.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
I want to personally thank you for listening to Love for the Truth Radio. Please visit our website at www.loveforthetruthradio.com. That's www.loveforthetruthradio.com. So, Pat, we're back here, and we covered as much as we could. We didn't cover everything. We know that the Trojan horse is technocracy. But can you just tell us a little bit more about your book, Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Transformation? When do you think it will be available, and how can we get in contact with you?
My guess is we're looking at another 6 weeks to 8 weeks before the book will actually be available in stores, and people will be able to buy it everywhere on Amazon and through their local bookstore if they want to order it through there. It would be available on our own website, of course, which is augustforecast.com, as well as we're creating a website called TECHNOCRACYRISING.com. Strangely enough, it's a good title. So TECHNOCRACYRISING.com will also have the book available for purchase, and it'll be available in print. It'll be available on Kindle, the ebook format, and people will find that it'll be easy to get a hold of once it's in the distribution channel.
Well, I'm very excited about your book. Just real quickly, what is your advice to Christians? I mean, technocracy is rising. There's so much happening to our society, to our government, the political arena, economics. Like, what on earth can we do as Christians? I feel like we're kind of stuck.
There's so much talk about Christian worldview these days, that Christians need to have Christian worldview. And there's a bunch of organizations telling you what that ought to be. And I'll tell you what, I've been a Christian now for over 40 years, and I've studied Bible prophecy almost all of those 40 years and been involved in, studying the Bible and stuff. And, I want to say that for the most part, our ladder has been leaning up against the wrong wall for a long time. And we talk about biblical worldview. That the first thing you have to grasp is that it means you have to understand the world as it really is, not as you think it is, as it really is. So we want to line the Bible up with that and, see the world for what it is, apply the Word of God to it, and then see what kind of a worldview comes out of that. That's where we need to be. That's what we need to be. It's the Word of God. Cling to the Word of God, folks. Thank you for listening to another program. We just really encourage you to get in touch with Patrick Wood and get a hold of that book.